You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we are going to be reviewing the fourth Ashes Test from Old Trafford. And there's been a lot of talking points about this fourth test from Old Trafford. Obviously the rain helping Australia to save the game and to retain the Ashes, which at the end of the day is a little bit of a disappointing sort of thing because this series was shaping up to be a great series, and if England would have won this fourth test, which they were on track to do so, it would have been an exciting last test match at the Oval this Thursday to set up the series nicely at 2-2. Unfortunately, the weather intervened, and that's just the way it is in cricket. It's always been based on the elements, and unfortunately, the weather had its final say. And for Australia, they got out of jail, and the rain was their saviour and saved their bacon. But on this episode of the podcast today, we're just pretty much going to talk about the fourth Ashes Test from Old Trafford, review it, how both teams performed, and preview what's going to happen in the final test at the Oval for this Ashes series, as we come closer and closer to the end of this long Ashes series, which has been going on for an eternity now, since we started in the first test match at Edgbaston in late June. So it's been a very long series, but plenty to talk about on today's episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. But before we do that, let's have a look at the match summary from the fourth Ashes Test between England and Australia from Old Trafford. And Australia batted first and made 317 all out in their first innings. Mitchell Marsh and Marnus Labuschagne top scored with 51 each. Chris Woakes took 5 wickets for England. England, in reply, in their first innings, were all out for 592. Zach Crawley top scored with 189. Josh Hazlewood took 5 wickets for Australia. And Australia, in their second innings, finished on 5 for 214. Marnus Labuschagne top scoring with 111. And Mark Wood took 3 wickets for England. Zach Crawley was named the player of the match for his 189. And that was the match summary. And that's how the match panned out from the fourth Ashes Test here at Old Trafford. What were the key moments and key factors from this fourth Ashes Test between England and Australia? Well, England bowling out Australia for 317 in the first innings was a key moment and a key factor that enabled England to keep Australia at bay and keep them well under 400. Zach Crawley's innings of 189, helping England score 592 in their first innings, was a key moment and a key factor for England in terms of them trying to set up the match and trying to put Australia under pressure. Marnus Labuschagne and Mitchell Marsh's partnership of 103 for the 5th wicket in Australia's second innings, which helped Australia to safety and secure a draw along with the weather as well. Obviously, Labuschagne and Marsh had to bat around about 30 overs on day 4 when we came back out to play on day 4. Up until Labuschagne got out towards the end of that 30-over period. But pretty much that partnership pretty much helped Australia in this test match to get over the line and get a draw. The biggest factor was the rain, which ultimately sealed the fate of the test match. And those were the key moments and key factors from this fourth Ashes Test between England and Australia from Old Trafford. Let's talk about how both England and Australia performed in this fourth Ashes Test at Old Trafford. Let's talk about their performances with both bat and ball and how both teams approached this fourth Ashes Test from Old Trafford. So let's start with England, talk about their performance and talk about how their batters performed and went about things in this fourth Ashes Test from Old Trafford. Crawley, 189, Duckett 1, Ali 54, Root 84, Brook 61, Stokes 51, and Bairstow 99 not out. That's how the England batters performed and went about things in this fourth Ashes Test from Old Trafford. Let's talk about their first innings, England. Obviously, they batted once in this test match, given the weather, and obviously it was very unlikely that England were going to probably bat again in this test match. So let's talk about their innings. It was a pretty destructive innings from England, scoring 592 runs in their first innings at a run rate of 5.49 from 107.4 overs, which really showed their new way of playing Test cricket, obviously with Bazball, really putting the Australian bowlers under pressure immensely, which saw them gain a first innings lead of 275 runs after after England bowled Australia out for 317. It was a very handy first innings lead and put them in the box seat. Zach Crawley's innings of 189 was important, really set the tone for England. And led the way for England with the bat as well. Key partnerships of 121 for the second wicket, Crawley and Ali. 206 for the third wicket, Crawley and Root. 86 for the fifth wicket, Brooke and Stokes. And the 10th wicket partnership of 66 between Bairstow and Anderson were all key contributions to England scoring 592 runs in their first innings. So that's how England went about their batting in the first innings of this test match. It was probably England's best batting performance of the series to date. They Bazballed Australia in a big way. And it was really the first time in this series that we saw England really dominate Australia with Bazball and playing this aggressive, positive brand of cricket. It was the first time in the series that we saw them actually put it on full gas, really put the foot down. And they put the foot down in a big way on the accelerator here at Old Trafford. Zach Crawley, as I mentioned, his innings of 189 was key. He batted well. He played some good shots. And I think for Zach Crawley, this is probably the best innings he's played in his career. He mentioned that after his innings, he said it's probably the best innings I've played. Obviously, he scored the 267 against Pakistan in 2020 in England during that tour that Pakistan had to England, obviously behind closed doors. That was a pretty good innings, but this innings here at Old Trafford was probably better than that. As we know with Zach Crawley, he has the ability to bat like this. We know he's got the talent, but I think the one thing that England fans are frustrated about Zach Crawley, and that's why Zach Crawley gets talked about often, is because of his inconsistency as a player. And people are saying he should be dropped, and obviously under the Stokes and McCullum regime, that they're backing him immensely. They've spoken a lot about Zach Crawley. They've defended Zach Crawley because, especially Brendan McCullum, has defended Zach Crawley a lot because Brendan McCullum has said that Zach Crawley reminds Brendan McCullum of him when he was a player. So Zach Crawley and Brendan McCullum are very similar. Very dangerous players once they get going. Very inconsistent at the same time. So, with that backing, Zach Crawley's got that confidence to go out and play these innings. Obviously, he's not going to do this all the time. He'll do it every now and again, but when he does, it's very explosive, it's very good. And he was helped out with a lot of poor bowling from Australia. Australia bowled to his strength. They bowled too straight on his pads, and he was able to work them onto the leg side. They didn't bowl enough outside off stump because he does have a bit of vulnerability there, Zach Crawley. But for Zach Crawley, it was an incredible innings. You've got to give him credit that. You've got to give credit to him for the innings he played. And it just, in a way, it sort of really reaffirms to probably the England cricket fans and maybe to the England cricket team that the brand of cricket that we're playing, this is the outcome of it in the way that Zach Crawley bats it. So it was a pretty good innings from him, really set the tone for England, really, in the absolutely shellacking that England gave Australia in this test match. Joe Root batted well. He made 84. Key partnership with Zach Crawley of 206. Joe Root on track for another century, but a very good delivery from Josh Hazlewood that kept low from the James Anderson end. And we've seen in the test match a few deliveries from that end kept low. And the Joe Root dismissal, where Josh Hazlewood got him out, a ball that kept low and clean bowled him, it reminded me of Joe Root's dismissal in the 2021-22 Ashes series in Australia, where in Hobart, Scott Boland bowled to Joe Root, and Joe Root got out to a similar way as he did to Josh Hazlewood, as he did with Scott Boland, to a delivery that kept low and knocked over his off stump on that occasion. So I just found that comparison, and that took me back to that. Very two similar dismissals that Joe Root got in Hobart to Scott Boland, that one that kept low and clean bowled him. And obviously the one that Hazlewood got in this test match here that kept low as well. So two very similar dismissals that I noted there. Very hard playing as a batter on a pitch that's keeping a little bit low, uneven bounce. It's very hard to judge the bounce, and is it going to keep low? Is it going to bounce high and bounce sharply? But I thought Joe Root looked comfortable again. You know, he's a class player, as we know. He batted well. Harry Brook and Ben Stokes batted well. Both of them made 50s. Harry Brook has got confidence after the match-winning performance in Headingley in the third test. Ben Stokes going about his merry way as captain. He's had a pretty good series with the bat, even though he's not making contributions with the ball. And Johnny Bairstow, obviously been in the news, in the media, obviously what happened at Lords, obviously his form, coming back from injury, dropping catches as a keeper. He had a pretty good test match, to be fair. I know a lot of people will give him flack and stick about his keeping and his batting in this series, but I thought he had a pretty good game in this fourth test. He caught well, which is a rarity from Bairstow in this series. He's dropped a few key moments, key chances that really cost England dearly in the first two test matches. And a lot of people have been making those observations. Now, England can't win the Ashes now. Of course, you're going to pick up on these things. 99 not out. He batted well with James Anderson. That partnership of 66, another important partnership for England. But for Bairstow, maybe a point to prove about all the criticism that's come his way. So he batted well. He had a pretty good game. He took a very good catch, one-hand catch, in Australia's first innings. I think it was when Mitchell Marsh got out, to Chris Wokes, I think it was. That was a pretty good catch that he took. So he had an okay game. And England's batting was pretty good in this test match. I think the one thing that people will question about, and I've noticed is after the test match is finished, the reactions come in from fans, and fans pick up little things that England could have done better and probably cost them the Ashes, is probably Ben Stokes' decision not to declare. Personally, I don't think that would have made any difference anyway. I could understand why Ben Stokes batted the way he did. He wanted to bat on because he wanted more runs. The more runs you have, it will slowly diminish the chances of Australia making England bat again and putting Australia under immense pressure. If you can put on more runs, which they did, 275 run lead, that's a pretty imposing lead, nearly 300. Australia ain't going to make England bat again. So the aim of Ben Stokes there was to get as many runs as he could to ensure that England didn't have to bat again if that was the case. And I know a lot of people will pick up on that and say, that took time out of the bowling time that England needed to get Australia out because of the weather. But anyway, the weather was going to be bad for day 4 and day 5 anyway. So we can look at this in hindsight, and it didn't really make any difference whatsoever. But a lot of people will pick up on that. And they will say, it could have been it could have been a lot different if he declared earlier rather than batting on. But anyway, these things happen, and you look at these things in hindsight. But just to finish off about England's batting, pretty good batting performance, probably their best of the series, very dominant, and obviously a lot of confidence for England going forward into the last test at the Oval is that they can absolutely put Australia under pressure yet again with Bazball. Let's talk about England's bowlers and their performance in this fourth Ashes test from Old Trafford. A wicket each for Ali and Root. 6 wickets for Wokes, 4 wickets for Wood, 2 wickets for Broad, and a wicket for Anderson. And that's how they performed in this fourth Ashes Test, the England bowlers. Let's talk about how they performed across the 2 innings. The first innings, they won the toss, chose to bowl first in a game that England had to win. They wanted to bowl first, which is an aggressive mindset. Obviously, the stat coming into this Test match when England did decide to bowl first is that no team, no captain at Old Trafford has ever won a Test match winning the toss and bowling first. So, but that's just the way Ben Stokes is. He's that sort of character. He's going to do things that are going to be a little bit outside of the box when it comes to the conventions and methods in Test cricket. It was an aggressive approach. Given the weather around, they had to bowl first. That was their best chance of winning the Test match. They bowled Australia out for 317, which was a good result. Under 400 is good when you bowl a side out in the first innings. That was a big tick there for England. Chris Woakes led the way with the ball for England, taking 5 for 62. In the second innings, they had a lead of 275 runs, which put Australia under immense pressure, put England in the box seat, had a limited opportunity to bowl Australia out due to the rain. And on day 4, the only bit of cricket that we had over day 4 and day 5, it was a 30-over window, but they only took 1 wicket, Joe Root getting rid of Marnus Labuschagne after Labuschagne brought up his century. The weather and time wasn't on England's side, and they weren't able to take the last 5 wickets to wrap up the match. Therefore, the game was a draw. So England's bowling across the 2 innings was okay. Another good bowling performance from England again. They bowled good lines and lengths, built pressure well, took wickets at regular intervals. Chris Woakes, as I mentioned, bowled really well again. Since he's come into the side, him and Mark Wood have really made a difference to this England bowling unit. It's given them something different, and it's given them an element of potency that the England bowling attack didn't have in the first 2 Test matches of the series. Chris Woakes bowled well, taking 5 wickets. Mark Wood bowled well again, good pace, took a few wickets. James Anderson was ineffective again. He looked a little bit sluggish, Anderson. Not quite at his best in this series. Stuart Broad, he's been good in this series thus far, Stuart Broad. Obviously picking up wicket number 600. Obviously Travis Head was victim number 600 for Stuart Broad. But he wasn't at his best with the ball in this Test match either, Stuart Broad. He looked a little bit scratchy after the long break. He's played 4 Test matches on the bounce. Obviously, you take a bit of a break. The 3rd Test and the 4th Test were probably a 9-day break. So it takes a little bit of time to get back into the swing of things and rhythm. I think Stuart Broad was just going through that. Didn't really have a great game with the ball. Moeen Ali bowled okay, but in the second innings he bowled some loose deliveries. Maybe that finger's starting to give him some problems again. The skin probably just getting ripped up when he's spinning the ball. The blister. He didn't bowl some great deliveries either in the second innings. He batted okay. He made a contribution there, getting a half century, but the bowling side of things was a little bit poor from him in this bowling performance. So yeah, a pretty good bowling performance again from England. But I thought for England, knowing that the weather was around and they had to make hay when the sun was shining, as they say. But in this case, it was a bit dark and gloomy at Manchester. But I thought on day 4, where we didn't really expect to get any cricket at all, many people said day 4 is a washout, same with day 5. Obviously, day 5 was a washout. Day 4 wasn't. We got a window in of 30 overs. And I think England looked a little bit flat on day 4. That was their opportunity where they could have won the Test match in that 30-over period. Obviously, 30 overs is a very long time. It's a session. And given the weather around, I thought they looked a little bit flat. They looked a little bit down. There was no zip. There was no energy. And Marnus Labuschagne and Mitchell Marsh batted well in that period. They added 100 runs in that partnership. Australia scored runs. The ball wasn't doing much for England. It was a little bit, pretty much, not doing much at all. I think that has a little bit to do with the conditions. If it's too wet and the ball gets wet on the outfield, the ball doesn't swing as much. And that had a role to play as well. That's why it looked a little bit innocuous. They looked a little bit flat. Maybe the weather on day 5 was probably in the back of their minds, and they probably said, you know what, this is probably the only opportunity we're going to get to take the wickets, and that proved to be the case. They picked up 1 wicket, obviously, Joe Root getting rid of Marnus Labuschagne, which gave them hope. Obviously, the umpires said you can't bowl your quicks, you have to bowl your spinners. Ben Stokes wasn't happy about that. They got the ball change, the new ball, the replacement ball, I should say. They got that changed because the old ball wasn't doing much. Marnus Labuschagne ruffled a few feathers when he asked, to have a look at the ball. Ben Stokes wasn't happy about that, according to Marnus in his press conference. They just looked a little bit flat, England. And maybe they knew that the weather obviously was going to be bad on day 5, and that's what happened. So, their bowling performance over the last 3 test matches, including this one here at Old Trafford, have been good. As I mentioned with Wokes and Mark Wood coming in, it's definitely added a lot more to their bowling. But, they will rue that opportunity, England, with that 30-over window. They could have done some more damage, and they were a little bit flat. But the weather wasn't on their side, and that's just the way it is. So to finish up about England's bowling performance, it was good again in the first innings. The second innings was good up until that 30-over window. The weather didn't really help them. They looked a little bit flat. They could have done some more damage, but oh well, these are the things that you look in hindsight. But overall, generally, it was another good bowling performance by England in this 4th Ashes Test from Old Trafford. Let's talk about Australia's performance in the 4th Ashes Test here from Old Trafford, how they went about things with bat and ball. Let's talk about the batters and how they performed for Australia in this 4th Ashes Test. Warner, 32 and 28. Khawaja, 3 and 18. Labuschagne, 51 and 111. Smith, 41 and 17. Head, 48 and 1. Mitchell Marsh, 51 and 31 not out. And Green, 16 and 3 not out. And Carey, 20. That's how the Australian batters went about things in this 4th Ashes Test from Old Trafford. Let's talk about their performance across the 2 innings. The first innings, they were bowled out for 317. They didn't make use of the batter-friendly conditions. It was pretty a flat pitch. They lost the toss. England won the toss, put them in. 317, not a good score. That's not going to win you too many test matches. And from that moment on, Australia were on the back foot. Australia needed a score of 450 minimum. Well, at least that score, but also 350 minimum to be competitive. That didn't turn out to be the case. The second innings, in survival mode, they were trailing by 275 runs after England piled on the runs of 592. They faced an uphill battle to save and draw the test. They needed help from the weather gods above, and the weather gods helped them out in the end. So at stumps on day 3, Australia were 4 for 113, so in a precarious position. Obviously, but the weather over day 4 and day 5 helped them out a bit there. So due to rain, time was taken out of the game, as we know, but Australia had to bat for 30 overs on day 4, where we didn't expect play to happen. And the partnership of 103 for the 5th wicket between Mitchell Marsh and Marnus Labuschagne negated that 30-over window to help Australia get over the line in the end. And that was the only play that we had across day 4 and day 5 because the weather just took over. And that's what happened. So that's how Australia went about their 2 innings in this test match. Once again, Australia's batting was poor, very poor. It was a similar theme and similar story to the series. Batters getting in, getting stanced, didn't convert them into big scores. Poor shot selection, poor decision making. Travis Head pulling Stuart Broad in the first innings was one example of a poor shot selection. Getting out to Stuart Broad, who picked up wicket number 600. I think for Stuart Broad, out of the 600 wickets that he's picked up in Test cricket, I think the one to get rid of Travis Head to bring up 600 test wickets was probably the easiest one he's got out of the 600. It was a poor shot from Travis Head. You know that they're going to bombard you with the short ball, and you hit it straight to the fielder, Joe Root, at fine leg. And it was a very ugly shot. In the second innings, it was an ugly shot to get out to Mark Wood again. With the short ball, got into a tangle. Steve Smith, another example of a poor shot selection. In the second innings, trying to pull and trying to hook Mark Wood. This time he got an outside edge that went straight to Johnny Bairstow, straight into the gloves. So just stuff like that, which has been the common theme from Australia, just poor shot selections. And, it's just not good enough. And it wasn't good enough again in this fourth test. So the same stories again, batting collapses, poor shot selection, poor decision-making, cost Australia again. Marnus Labuschagne, let's talk about him. A very good century from Marnus, 111. And for Marnus, as we know, he's been at the talking point in this series. He's under pressure because he hasn't scored runs. He hasn't really had the series that we would have hoped from Marnus Labuschagne. But for him to grind it out, he found a way. He scored 51 in the first innings, 111 in the second. I think it was probably the best that I've seen Marnus bat in this whole series. He started to get his tempo back. He started to get his rhythm back. And I think for once, he didn't overcomplicate things. I think the reason that Marnus has been struggling, he's been trying too hard to score runs. And when you're looking to try too hard at something, you tend to make mistakes and you tend to not really do what you need to do properly. And for Marnus, he's been trying too hard to score runs, rather than just keeping things simple, having a clarity of mind and clear of mind, and making sure that his mind's clear. But he batted well, hopefully a sign of things to come for Marnus. I thought his innings, in the second innings, the partnership he had with Marsh, as I mentioned, was a very key moment for Australia in terms of them trying to negate the 30-over period on day 4, when they needed to bat out, because they did that, and then it rained for the rest of the test match on day 4 and day 5, and that pretty much helped Australia retain the Ashes. So he batted well. Steve Smith, he's been poor again in this test match. He scored a century at Lords, but since then he's dropped off a bit. Australia need him to step up. He was disappointed. David Warner again in the spotlight. But this time, with David Warner, he didn't get out to Stuart Broad. I guess that's a positive. He got out to Chris Woakes twice in this test match. In the first innings, he got he got caught behind by Chris Woakes. In the second innings, he got bowled by Chris Woakes. So I think Chris Woakes has got David Warner's number. At least Stuart Broad didn't get out David Warner in this test match, which was good for Warner's sake. But yet again, under pressure again. He looked okay, Warner. 32 and 28. He had starts. He looked okay. Just can't go on and get that big score. Maybe the last test match for him at the Oval coming up. And if Australia do win at the Oval, I think it's probably a good send-off for Warner. So we shall wait and see on that. But he needs to step up, potentially. Has he got one more good innings left in him, David Warner? Because Australia need him to step up, because Australia will want to win the series outright now. Mitchell Marsh, what can we say about Mitchell Marsh? I thought he was fantastic again. 51 he scored in the first innings, my mistake, and 31 not out in the second innings. An important partnership with Labuschagne, obviously, as I mentioned before. He's been good. He's been better than Cameron Green. I think coming into the test match, we had that debate about who's going to be the all-rounder. I think now, for Australia going into the last test, I think it's Mitchell Marsh. Cameron Green looks out of sorts, but Marsh has batted really well. The other batters, Alex Carey, he made 20. He batted okay, but he could have done better. Usman Khawaja didn't have a great game himself, got out for 3 and 18, given what's happened before in the series for Khawaja. And Cameron Green, as I mentioned, looked a little bit out of sorts, coming back from that hamstring strain. He's just not looking comfortable at the moment, Cameron Green. So he'll be disappointed with how he performed with the bat in this test match. The tail enders, from Australia again didn't really contribute. The only one who did was Mitchell Starc. Cummins and Hazelwood didn't really contribute that much. So I suppose the extra batting was a little bit justified with Australia. But there's still a lot of work to do for the Australian batters going forward into the Test match at the Oval. They gotta have a bit more positive intent. Look to score. Look to put pressure back on the England bowlers. Look to do the basics properly, and be better in their decision making and their shot selection, and stop these batting collapses. And Australia need to really tighten things up come the final Test match at the Oval. So their batting in this Test match was poor again, as it has been for the last few Test matches of this series. They've got to fix up these problems. They've got to stop making the same mistakes. We shall see if they do learn the lessons in the last Test at the Oval with the bat. Let's talk about Australia's bowlers and their performance in this fourth Ashes Test and how they went about things with the ball. No wickets for Labuschagne and Mitchell Marsh. 2 wickets each for Green and Starc. A wicket for Cummins and 5 wickets for Hazelwood. That's how the Australian bowlers performed in this fourth Ashes Test from Old Trafford. Let's talk about their bowling performance in England's first innings. And defending 317 of the first innings was always going to be tough for Australia to put England under pressure. In the end, they conceded 592 from England, and they conceded a lead of 275 runs on the first innings. And that pretty much summed up the story for England in this Test match. They were very dominant, but it also summed up Australia's performance in this Test match, and they were very poor, especially with the ball. And that was to be the case. Australia's bowling in this Test match was very poor. It was probably the worst I've seen Australia bowl ever in my time of watching this current group. It was probably the worst performance. I think many people would agree with that. With the bowling attack of Hazelwood, Cummins and Starc, you would say it's their worst performance as a bowling group collectively. And as individuals, it was probably the same as well. And even for Pat Cummins, it was probably the day from hell for Pat Cummins. Yeah, it was nothing much to say to it, really. I can't really add much. It was pretty poor. Didn't handle the pressure well of Bazball. They chopped and changed their plans and tactics throughout the innings. They overdid the short ball too much. They didn't get the tactics right, and that's why they conceded so many runs than they did. And I think for the first time in the series, Australia didn't have any answers. They just ran out of answers. They said, oh, what do we do now? You know, everyone was scratching their heads, including Pat Cummins. He was scratching his head. He couldn't figure out what to do. Where we're going to take our next wicket. You know, it looked like that Australia just were absolutely pummeled, and they couldn't do anything about it. And a lot of people have questioned Pat Cummins in terms of his tactics and the captaincy, and say he should be sacked and that. Obviously, it wasn't a great Test match from Pat. It was probably his worst Test match he's had in his career. You don't say that every day about Pat Cummins because he's such a very good player. He's a good bowler. He gets the job done. But as captain, with the extra responsibility, you are going to get this scrutiny. And I think for Pat, look, he's trying his best, you know. You can see he's trying. It's not the first time that England's done this to any team. They did it to South Africa, they did it to Pakistan, they did it to New Zealand, they even did it to India. All those captains have had a tough time of it against England. How do they work out to take wickets? And for Pat Cummins, he looked a little bit flustered. He looked a little bit unsure about where to go next in terms of the tactics and the plans. Obviously, Pat Cummins has that ability to be calm on the outside. He doesn't really show his emotions. I guess he didn't show his frustrations from a physical point of view outside of his body. But on the inside, he would have been disappointed. And you could tell from the tone of his voice afterwards in the press conference, he was a little bit disappointed about his own performance, and he would be. But I think it's just an overreaction, I think. You know, cricket fans, sporting fans, when things don't quite go right for your team, people would say, oh, you got to sack this player. You got to drop him. You got to sack Pat Cummins as captain. He's no good. This guy will be better. And look, at the end of the day, everyone's entitled to have a bad day. Pat Cummins had a really bad day. The Australian team had a bad day. That's the way cricket is. That's the way sport is. You have good and bad days. And this was a bad day. But it's important to learn from these bad days so they don't happen again. Learn the mistakes. Learn the areas that we need to get better at. And Australia need to get better at the tactics. And I know people have made that point about Pat Cummins, that he's not good as a tactician. But we've got Steve Smith in the side. Australia have got Steve Smith in the side. He's a good tactician because he thinks like a batter. So I guess many people have made those arguments about Pat Cummins, the tactical side. Is he good enough to be a leader? Look, he'll be captain of Australia. I don't see him stepping down. He'll make that decision himself. And even Pat Cummins said, when he was appointed as captain, he said, this is not going to be a long-term thing. I don't see myself being captain for 5+ years or anything like that. It's a short-term thing. And then whoever's the next captain, hopefully they'll have the experience and they can take over the team. And I think that will happen in the end. I think many people would expect that to happen, that Cummins will have a succession plan. But for the time being, he's captain. And the tone has changed. Obviously, everyone was praising Pat Cummins because he won us the game at Edgbaston. Without Pat Cummins, Australia are not winning that game. And Australia would have been 2-0 down in this series if that didn't happen. So people were praising Cummins and said he was the greatest player of them all. And, he batted well. And then obviously what happened here at Old Trafford, people have said he should be sacked. So I think it comes back to that reactive mind, that we react to things that don't go right, and we should overreact and say he should be sacked and all this stuff. At the end of the day, that's just the way cricket is. England had a good day, Australia had a bad day. But I think for Australia, they need to change the tactics a little bit. And I think for Australia, the problem is that they've been too safe. As soon as England hit a few boundaries, they push the field back. And that allows England to pick up easy singles, which throughout this series, when I've been watching how Australia have been going about things in the field, I just shake my head and say, you can't do that. You got to have fielders in attacking positions. You got to have catchers. It's okay to have a few boundary riders, but not everyone out, because it just makes it too easy. You want to put pressure on the batter. And sometimes it feels like that Australia don't want to take a wicket. They just want to save runs. The priority and the goal of a fielding side is to take 10 wickets. How are we going to take 10 wickets? That should be the priority, not about saving runs. That comes into it, but that shouldn't be the main priority, because you're not looking to take a wicket. You just want to save runs and limit the losses and limit the damage. That's what England did. That's what Australia did in this test match, and that's what they've done throughout the whole series. They've had a bit of luck because England have gifted them some wickets. But for Australia, they need to be a bit more taking a risk, be willing to be driven for runs, but in order to take wickets. So I want to see that from Australia. It's okay if Zach Crawley hits you through a few boundaries through the covers. But if you're building pressure on him and having the right fields, you can get a wicket. And that's why people lost their rag. And that's why many Australian fans are frustrated at Cummins' tactics because of these reasons. But he's entitled to have a bad day, Pat Cummins. And he'll bounce back from this, hopefully. And he knows that he didn't do well. He will learn. He's a quick learner. He'll learn from this. He'll reflect on it. I don't think he'll be sacked. I don't think he will resign anytime soon. He will be the captain. The team have his backing. I guess Cricket Australia have his backing as well, that to be the captain, obviously. But, as I go back to it before, people will react to these things differently. But that's just the way it is. That's just the way sport is. You don't have anything go your way. A lot of things don't go your way in cricket. you plan and you do things and they don't quite go your way. And that's what happened with Pat Cummins in this test match. So I would like to see Australia just change the tactics a little bit. I thought Australia bowled well to the tail-enders. Australia haven't bowled well to England's tail-enders in this series, but Woakes, Wood and Broad in particular, they didn't make much of a contribution, didn't they? Because Australia bowled well to them. They bowled proper lines and lengths to the tail-enders. And, they were rewarded with wickets. So I thought that was a positive, at least, from Australia's bowling performance. There weren't too many positives. Josh Hazlewood took 5 wickets and he, has had a tough series, so that's good for him. Hopefully he can be, gain that confidence going into the last test. And obviously a lot of people have questioned about not selecting Todd Murphy, specialist spinner. I don't think it would have made any difference if Todd Murphy played in this test. I know it was a bit of a conservative selection because Australia didn't want to lose the test match. They wanted to strengthen the batting. They wanted to have Green and Marsh, 2 extra all-rounders. But in saying that, I think Murphy would have got smashed anyway, in hindsight. But there's plenty to work on for the Australian bowlers going forward. Change the tactics. Look to take wickets. And don't be conservative too early. There's always a point. If you feel like I need to have a few fielders back, then put a few fielders back. Because you can have that balance as a captain. Okay, look to attack, take wickets, have attacking fields. If the runs get a little bit too out of hand, I can put some fielders back, but still have some fielders in attacking positions and look to take wickets. I think Australia at times have gone to that ploy of being conservative too early. And that's why England have been batting the way they have, because it's just too easy for them. So Australia need to make it hard for England to score runs. And in England, they will be impatient. We've seen that from England. They want to score quickly. They want to impose themselves with this mentality of baseball. But if you make them earn their runs and put them under pressure, it's going to play on their patience and they'll probably get out. So I think for Australia, change the tactics. I think that's why everyone's frustrated, especially Australian fans. But to finish up about Australia's bowling, plenty of work to do. They're a good bowling attack. They had a bad test. Cummins had a bad game as captain and as a bowler. But there's an opportunity to bounce back. And that's the thing in cricket, to have that positive mindset and say, yeah, we had a bad game, but we can bounce back in the next game. And hopefully they do. And hopefully for Australia's sake, they can wrap up the series and win the series in England, which they didn't do in 2019. We shall see what happens on that front with the Australian bowlers. Can they learn from their mistakes? Can they get better? Let's see what they do at the Oval. Let's preview the 5th Ashes Test from the Oval. Let's have a look at the test stats between England and Australia at the Oval. Let's predict the playing 11s for both England and Australia for the 5th Ashes Test from the Oval. Let's have a look at the test stats, first of all, between England and Australia. Head-to-head record at the Oval in test matches. The first test match that England and Australia played at the Oval was back in 1880. And 38 matches have been played between the two countries here at the Oval. 14 of them have been drawn. England have won 17 to Australia's 7. So they lead the head-to-head by quite a long way, England. And it is a very historical ground, the Oval, especially when it comes to Ashes cricket. It's witnessed many great moments between England and Australia over the years. Obviously, let's talk about both teams and their 11s for this last test match of the series. We'll start with England, first of all. Concerns with injury. Chris Woakes could be under an injury cloud. James Anderson hasn't had the impact with the ball in this series. He had another poor test at Old Trafford, his home ground. Mark Wood, does he play 3 test matches in a row, given his track record with injuries? Stuart Broad has played 4 tests in a row. I think England will want Woakes, Wood and Broad to play because they've made an impact with the ball. Barring injury, they should play because England want them to play because they've been the best bowlers for England in this series by quite a mile. So you would think, barring any injury or any concerns with their bodies, they should play. I think England will probably make one change, and I think that's for James Anderson. I know, Anderson hasn't had the series that we would have hoped from him, and especially England would have hoped a lot better from Anderson in this series. Obviously, maybe it's age catching up with him towards the end of his career. He's nearly 41. He could come out, and I think England may play Josh Tongue. He's got that extra pace, or they may play Ollie Robinson because he missed out because of a back spasm. So we'll have to wait and see on that for England. But their potential 11 for this fifth Ashes test here at the Oval could be Crawley, Duckett, Ali, Root, Brook, Stokes, Bairstow, Woakes, Wood, Broad, Robinson, or Tongue. Let's talk about Australia's potential 11 for the fifth Ashes test. A couple of question marks for Australia in terms of selection. Will they make a change? I think they will. They make a change or two, maybe. Obviously, Mitchell Marsh, Cameron Green, the all-rounder debate, which was a safe selection for the fourth test given the weather here at Old Trafford. Didn't play Murphy, a specialist spinner. I think Todd Murphy will come back. You've got to play a spinner at the Oval. And I think Australia will admit personally to themselves, they won't admit it to the public, but to themselves, that we probably made a mistake, which everyone has been saying. So I think Murphy will play. You can't drop Mitchell Marsh because he's done well in the last couple of test matches. So I think the one who gets dropped, I think it's Cameron Green. I don't think it will hurt Cameron Green to get dropped. Obviously, in his test career, he hasn't got dropped. He's missed out a few test matches. He missed out the last test at Headingley because of a hamstring injury. He missed out a few test matches in India because of a finger injury that he picked up in the last Australian summer. So he hasn't been dropped, Cameron Green, but he hasn't looked at himself in this series. He's looked a bit scratchy with the bat. He's taken a few wickets with the ball. He's taken some good catches in the gully. But I feel like it wouldn't do any harm to Cameron Green if he gets dropped. So I think he'll get dropped. I think Todd Murphy would come in for him. Australia have also got some other concerns with Mitchell Starc with his shoulder injury. Pat Cummins as well. Does he need a rest? Does Michael Nessa come in? Does Scott Boland come in? So I would think Australia would like to keep the same attack that they had here at Old Trafford. But if it will depend if Starc's injury with his shoulder, does he pull up okay? Then he plays. If he doesn't, then you either consider Boland, maybe Nessa, to strengthen the batting a bit, because he is a good batter, Nessa. So these are the things that Australia will have to consider. But in saying that, I think they'll probably make a change, and that's probably Todd Murphy. On the other hand, they'll probably keep David Warner. They won't drop him, given his form of late, and obviously him being in the talking point in the media. Obviously, they won't drop him now. He'll play the last test. It could be his last test match. We don't know. Depends on the result, probably. If Australia win the series, I should say. They've already won the Ashes, but if they win the series here, then you'll think David Warner would play his last test. Depends on the result, on the outcome of this test match. So Australia's potential 11 for the fifth Ashes test of the Oval could be Warner, Khawaja, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Mitchell Marsh, Carey, Starc, Cummins, Murphy, and Hazlewood. Now, who's going to win this final test match at the Oval? Well, the last time that England and Australia played at the Oval, England won by 135 runs in 2019, which enabled England to draw the series. England find themselves in a similar position in this series in 2023. Plenty to play for in this test match, even though the Ashes are not up for grabs. Australia have retained the urn. Plenty for both teams to play for. Australia can definitely win the series, and they will want to win the series, because if they win the series, it feels like that the 2-0 lead that they had is validated, and that the draw at Old Trafford was validated as well. And obviously, if they win the series, then it's pretty much a success. If they lose the series, if they draw the series 2-2, then it's a failure. So for Australia, they will want to win the series for the first time in England since 2001. England will want to draw the series like they did in 2019. But with England, I think the advantage that Australia may have is that if England come to the Oval and they look a little bit flat, subconsciously they know that we want to play positively this brand of cricket with Bazball, but knowing that we can't win the Ashes, maybe they will be a little bit flat, maybe just a little bit off their game. That could work in Australia's favour. But what I saw at Old Trafford, if Australia play the way they play here at the Oval like they did at Old Trafford, then I think England will win the Test match quite easily. So Australia need to come into this last Test match with a positive mindset, look to win, not be conservative, don't look to draw and be safe. Also change the tactics with the ball. Hopefully the bowlers will learn their lesson. With England, they'll be hoping to draw the series and finish off on a good note. So I think, it could go either way. Again, you would think the way that England played in the last test, they should win this last test here at the Oval. But, with the Ashes not on the line anymore, it could be a different story. So it could go either way. Either Australia win, England win. We shall see. But let's hope for a good test match. The Oval has witnessed many great historical moments in Ashes cricket. 1882 for that one-off test that really kick-started the Ashes legend. Don Bradman, 1948, getting out for a duck here in his final innings. Steve Waugh scoring a century in 2001 with a calf injury that pretty much, it just epitomizes who Steve Waugh was, that tough sort of gritty cricketer. Also Sir Leonard Hutton, one of England's finest opening batsmen, scoring 364 in 1938, which was the highest ever individual test score at the time in test cricket. Did that at an Ashes test against Australia where he batted for 13 hours. So it has witnessed many great moments in Ashes cricket, the Oval. And hopefully we get another exciting test match. In the context of the series, yes, the Ashes may not be up for grabs anymore because Australia's retained them, but let's hope for another exciting test match, as we've seen throughout the first 3 test matches of the series. Let's hope we get that at the Oval. But we shall see what happens at the Oval for the 5th and final test of the series. Now, to finish off our review of the 4th Ashes test from Old Trafford, for this episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast today, let's talk about my final thoughts, how I saw the test match overall. It was probably the most one-sided test match of the series, given how England dominated over the 3 days. A lot of people said they should have won, and they were on track to win, but it was the weather at the end of the day that cost them. Australia would be disappointed. It was the worst performance that Australia's had in the series. But hopefully for them, they can turn things around at the Oval and win the series. Obviously, it's not ideal that the weather had a part to play in this test. That happens. Cricket's an outdoor game. It's open to the elements. This is going to happen. And we all know that. For many of us who've watched and loved cricket all our lives, we know that these things are going to happen. Many test matches are decided by the weather. And sometimes it's a draw. And I know a lot of people are not happy about that and frustrated. They've offered some ideas to help improve these things, but whether or not they're realistic or not is another thing. Disappointed. The series was shaping up to be a great series. It would have been nice for a decider. That hasn't happened. But let's hope for a great last test match at the Oval and see what happens. We shall wait and see. And hopefully it will be a fantastic finish to what has been a great series up until the last test at Old Trafford where the weather played spoil sport. Well, thanks everyone for listening to our 4th Ashes test review of the 4th test match from Old Trafford. Thanks everyone for listening yet again. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before we go, stay tuned for more Ashes episodes, live streams from this Ashes series as we come towards the end of this Ashes series. It's been a long, arduous Ashes series. It's been intense, it's been draining, it's been exciting. We've seen moments that will forever be in our memories for a long time to come. So do stay tuned for that. More episodes coming out on the podcast on the Ashes. If you're listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, Let us know your thoughts on the fourth Ashes test in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say, your thoughts about this fourth test. How would you rate both teams' performances, etc., etc. So please do that. It's always great to hear everyone's ideas and thoughts on the game of cricket, and especially during this Ashes series. Thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.